Welcome to the Film Riot podcast. I'm Ryan Conley, and today on the show we have Jay Blakeson, who is a writer, director, whose first film that I saw was The Disappearance of Alice Creed, which was also the first film he ever wrote and directed. It's a great film, and I've been watching his career ever since, and his latest film, I Care a Lot, was really fantastic. If you have not seen it, definitely go watch that before you listen to this episode, because we are going to have a lot of spoilers within this episode, and it is a great film that you do not want spoiled. So definitely go check that out. It's on Netflix right now and is absolutely worth your time. I absolutely loved it. It's just a complex film with a great tone that he balances throughout the whole thing. And we're going to get into the complexities of the story and the characters and choices that he made. I just think it's really fascinating and really smart. The choices that he makes as a writer director, how he sees story and character, is really fascinating and really inspiring. And he's got a lot of great things to say on that. So I'm going to go ahead and shut up and get into it right now with Jay. I'd love to start where I start with everyone, which is just about you and how you got your start into the industry.
Well, I mean, I started off making short films when I was a teenager, and they weren't very good. I always wanted to be a director, but I didn't know anybody who could write anything. So I started writing my own short films, and then they sort of got a little bit better. And I started making them on 16mm at university, just self-financed. And then because they were on 16mm at the time, this is sort of before digital video. So it was either you made them on camcorder, SVHS or something like that, high 8 VHS, or you made them on film. And so I was shooting them on film. So automatically that sort of made them look a bit more impressive, even though they weren't amazing.
Yeah.
And my second one got the attention of an agent when I was about 21. And so I started writing things to try and convince her to sign me up. Eventually she did, off the back of a script I'd written. And then I thought it was going to be sort of like a very easy process to kind of get into the industry, which it then wasn't, you know?
Yeah.
So then I started working as like a runner in TV production and things like that. And it was a very slow process. I started like getting meetings off scripts and, you know, writing things that people liked but didn't want to make, and then get hired to sort of do rewrites and stuff. I think one of my first big breaks was I was asked to take part in a workshopping scheme for scriptwriters, where me and a bunch of other scriptwriters, you know, went from pitch through treatment to first draft over about 8 months in a group of 4. And then we talk about each other's scripts. And at the end of that, they would showcase the scripts. And that one actually got, that first script that I really sort of finished professionally, first feature script, was picked up by a company and very nearly got made, but then didn't get made. At this time, I'd been working on like UK TV shows as a writer, nothing wildly exciting, but just sort of like in the trenches, not making enough money to pay my rent. I was doing things like writing the copy on back of DVD box sets, as well as, you know, doing all I could, writing anything anybody would pay me for, really. And I got quite disillusioned, so I thought I would do something that sort of broke me out of that and sort of try and just do something on my own, because I was still making short films for like zero budgets, really. I was, you know, making them from my own savings. And the last one, I remember my dad gave me like a couple of £100 for my birthday one year, and that's what we made the film from. And so I was still making these things, and I thought if I can make a good 10-minute film for like £1,000, I could probably make a 100-minute film for £10,000.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
So I thought, what can I write that would allow me to do that? And I thought, well, what can I afford? It's like, well, I can't afford anything because we haven't got anything, and I couldn't really afford permits or anything like that, because as soon as you go outside, you got to pay for sort of liability insurance and all the boring stuff. So I decided to basically write within the limitations of what I had, which is I had an apartment, and I had 3 friends who were actors who I thought I could probably convince to do it. And then so I sat down and started to write a script that I could then shoot under those circumstances that would sort of break me out of this sort of like so screenwriter rut that I was in, because people quite liked me and thought I was quite talented, but nobody's really excited to hire me for anything, and certainly not as a director. So I wrote that script, and that was a script that ended up being The Disappearance of Alice Creed, which is my first film. And the intention of that was to not show it to anybody, because I was sort of sick of people sort of reading my scripts and kind of like screwing their faces up a bit and going, well, we quite like it, but... So I thought, I'll just make it. I'll make it with credit cards, and I'll make it on digital video, because by this point I was shooting on like, you know, HD cameras, like Sony HD Cam, I think was the last Sony. It's like I shot it on, and like my last short. So I thought, you know, I could probably do this. I don't really want to sort of like get rebuffed by the industry. I'll just do it myself, you know, because when I was growing up, I thought I was like really sort of, seduced by the stories of like, El Mariachi and Clark's and movies like that. These really small, self-funded movies that broke through and started careers. So I thought I was going to do it like that. But then my agent read it and she said, "This is great. We should send this out." And immediately I was like, okay, sure. Because not thinking that I would actually sell it, but just to see what, if people gave me a meeting and gave me some notes that made it better, fine. You know what I mean? Free notes, great.
Yeah.
From professionals. So I sent it out and immediately it got a lot of attention. Everybody really liked it, but nobody wanted to make it. I got some really nice emails saying no, some really generous refusals. Yeah. But normally you don't get them. You could tell that people were torn, that they kind of wanted to make it, but it was so low budget. It was like, it was going to be well under £1 million budget. And it was being designed to be made for, like, I say, somewhere between sort of 10 and £100,000. So I had the script. Lots of people liked it, but nobody wanted to make it. And I think 40 companies turned it down. And then one company who had actually already turned it down sort of changed their mind and decided they wanted to make it.
Oh, wow.
But I had to make it in 4 weeks in the Isle of Man, which is like an island in the Irish Sea between sort of Liverpool and Ireland, which is like a tax haven and has money to spend on film financing. So I guess my big break was when they said, when they said they were going to make it, I was really happy because it's like my first feature was going to get made,
Yeah.
You never know it's actually going to get made until basically they start spending money. So I think the moment I felt like this was my big break was when we bought the wood to build the set, because that was a big enough check that they were signing that they were sort of in it now. They couldn't really walk away without losing some money. So I remember that point thinking, wow, this is my big break. They're actually going to make this film and I'm going to, after 10 years in the industry, but sort of like 20 years thinking about it. At that point, it was like, now I'm actually going to make my first feature. So that felt like the moment, to me.
Man, it's great to hear that path that you were on. I love hearing that from people that we talk to on the podcast, because we talk about it all the time of how so many people think that somebody just broke in overnight, or, you just don't get a sense of how much went into from point A to point B, and just hearing all of that is just really relatable and really inspiring. And I loved The Disappearance of Alice Creed. I thought that was such a great film. I saw it when it came out, and I think it was like 2009, right?
We shot it in 2009. It came out in 2010.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that was a great film. I kind of map everything by my show, Film Riot, which came out in 2009. And I remember it was in those early days that I saw it because I was just so impressed by, what you guys pulled together and how smart it was. I love the very few location sorts of things, but it was still so tense. And your latest film, I Care a Lot, is incredibly tense. I just felt that tension the entire film, the entire runtime. I kind of, had that knot in my chest, which is a really hard thing, I think, to pull off. And you pulled it off beautifully. But I would love to dive into the writing and the directing. But before we do, I just want to know, where did this idea come from? I know that this is a reality, but I don't know to the extent that this is a reality, that these things happen. Was this like an article that you came across and then you just wanted to build on top of that?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know sort of exactly where ideas come from. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
because,
yeah.
It's not, I mean, I wish they did sort of come like eureka moments, there's like, that's definitely a movie. I mean, for every I Care a Lot, the year I wrote I Care a Lot, I think I probably started like 12 other things that felt like good ideas, So that one, I think maybe I read a tweet or in like I heard a news story. I can't exactly, because I looked up so many news stories after I heard the initial one. I can't quite remember the first one was, but I sort of fell down this rabbit hole of reading these sort of accounts of these people who, mainly the family of the people it happened to, where these guardians had come and taken their parents away. Then I read about the parents' stories, and then I found out news stories about these guardians who were doing it, and some of them that were arrested and charged, but they were charged for like, not for the act of taking these people out of their homes, but more for sort of, it's almost like tax fraud. They were overcharging or double charging. So it was more kind of, they got greedy, and they could have done this. They could have just done it all legally because it was a loophole that was there to be exploited. So that shard of an idea of like this horrible thing, which happens, like thousands of people get taken like this every year by these kind of predatory guardians. I mean, I must stress that there are some people who do, who are good as well, who actually want to take care of people.
Yeah.
But the system is such that, that it's very easy to exploit it. And, I come from England, where we have the National Health Service. So we have socialized medicine. It's free. Our health care is all free.
Right.
From the moment we're born to the moment we die. We can buy private healthcare, but why would you? Because you can get it for free. And so just from the outside, the kind of concept of this could happen because private enterprises sort of been allowed in to capitalize on vulnerable people rather than, the state or people around the vulnerable people coming in to help them felt like really ripe material. Because not just in this instance, but in other places like, for example, immigrants at the border, there's always a company that will build a facility to house them. If their children are taken away from them, somebody will build that facility and get paid to run a facility to, keep those children behind bars. And, that felt like something that was very specific to now in America, but increasingly so over here. Something that I can see kind of creeping in to the UK, this sort of, all hail private enterprise rather than like all hail empathy and support.
Yeah.
So that sort of idea sort of like pushed like at the soft part of my brain and sort of like embedded there like a splinter for a while. And I couldn't get the idea of like, I get sort of scared by Kafkaesque things, so like somebody knocking my door and them having complete power over me.
Yeah.
And the authority that we give, as humans to other human beings, like the police or like ICE or like, legal guardians. And the law, if it's not on your side, is a cage that traps you. Even if you're in the right, if they decide against you, there's not much you can do. So all that sort of stuff, sort of terrifies me. That sort of was lodged in there. But at the same time, I knew I didn't want to tell this story as like an earnest issues movie, if you see what I mean.
Yes.
I think it would just be unbearable to watch. Many people might think that, I care a lot, it's unbearable to watch. But I think it would just be so painful to watch this happen to somebody. It would be almost, you'd almost get sort of blinded by it, like, looking directly at the sun or something, that you wouldn't take in the information and your brain would sort of shut down a little bit. So, I wanted to do something that would deal with the subject, but I wasn't quite sure how to do it. But I'd always also wanted to make a film about ambition, because I really like films about ambition. I'm a real sucker for them. Even in films I don't love, if it's about ambition, there's a part of me that just sort of, really loves it. Like for something like The Pursuit of Happiness, which really is quite a painful film to watch for most of its, not creatively, just, because of the emotional story they're telling. It takes you to some very hard places, but just the drive and ambition of the main character, or even something like The Wolf of Wall Street, his ambition is very seductive, even though he's doing terrible things. And like recently, I, Tonya, like the ambition of somebody who wants to do things against the odds. I mean, even I guess something like Rocky or Karate Kid is a film about ambition, and I think people, as a film viewing public, we really engage with those sort of films because we all have ambitions. We all have things we wish we'd done or tried harder for or thought we could have done. And I think we sort of invest in those sort of underdog characters. So I always want to make a film about ambition. And I want to make a film about an ambitious woman rather than an ambitious man, because I kind of felt I hadn't seen very much of that. I mean, I talked about I, Tonya, but like traditionally through cinema, ambitious women who kind of don't stop at anything to get what they want are normally sort of femme fatales who are either like murderous or use their sexuality to get what they want, are sort of seen as like an othered danger in society, if you see what I mean. That sort of the films are sort of working out something that men are kind of paranoid about somehow. And so I didn't want to do that. I just wanted to do this film about a woman who was just as ruthless and just as ambitious as like anybody else is in the movies. Because I know tons of women like that, especially in the movie industry. There's tons of women that are very ambitious, very smart, very successful. And it just surprises me there's not more of them, as subjects of film. So these sort of two ideas were sort of floating around in my head at the same time, and they sort of coalesced, and I decided not to do the earnest version, but rather the version that, the sort of the sideways glance satirical version that, I love Dr. Strangelove and I love Billy Wilder's films. And recently I loved The Big Short, which did a similar thing to the financial crisis, which is like play, fast and loose with the tone, so you enjoy it. But like, should you be enjoying this? Should you be rooting for these people? Right. Are you even rooting for these people? It kind of puts you off balance, makes you feel a little bit queasy because nothing good is happening. You're just watching. It's an enjoyable thing when everything seems terrible, which for me is sort of quite a trick to play in Dr. Strangelove and in The Big Short. And I thought if I could do something like that with this story, it would sort of not only bring sort of front and center this sort of topic, which I think most people don't even know about is a thing, and then but make it in such a way that people would enjoy the movie and want to see the movie, so they would, it wasn't like I was preaching to the choir. And then with the Marla character, it kind of felt like she felt like these Guardians, when I read about them, they just kind of felt like their process was a bit like a gangster, the way they kind of come in and steal something and strip it for parts and then just leave, basically leave it kind of strewn across the desert, basically somebody's life. But everything she was doing was legal. And, just much like sort of gangsters or kind of bad actors, people don't want to stop them because they're profiting from them, and it's just, it's easier to look away and put the money in your pocket than it is to sort of confront the thing that they're doing because it's more convenient. So I thought all those themes and all the characters, that were sort of popping into my head that were in this system were really rich territory and sort of, so I just sort of jumped in and started swimming,
Yeah. And I love the way that you approached it. At least for me, it worked, I think, exactly like you wanted it to. I was extremely invested in the thing. And then at the end, all I could think about is this real? Does this really? So I know now, but only because the film, and I couldn't help myself. I had to Google and find these things out for myself. So it worked perfectly, at least for me. And it was such a tense thing. And I totally relate to that idea of that moment where she shows up and then just pulls her out of her own home against her will was really terrifying for me. It was crazy. It almost had like, not quite horror, but those elements to where that tension was hitting, even though it has this very unique tonal balance that it's striking, but it's still so tense. But like you said, you definitely can feel that more satirical nature. It was just really fascinating, the tightrope that you walked for this. And, it makes me wonder, was this a spec? Did you have your idea? Did you write this on spec, or did you get this set up off of a pitch?
No, I wrote it on spec. I mean, if I can write on spec, I will write on spec, because having been like the first 10 years of my career being a screenwriter that works in development, I learned how much I hate development. So yeah. I've got a good idea and I'll just write it, because, there's a thing that inevitably happens when you pitch and then write, which is everybody sees a different movie in their head when you pitch it. And they all write, they see the one that they want to make, the one that they want to see. And so when they get the one that you want to make and you want to see on their first draft, and first drafts aren't perfect, they're not quite there yet. So everybody who reads that script is always disappointed. Everybody's really excited from the pitch, and then everybody's disappointed from the first draft. And from then on in, you're just sort of trying to claw your way back from that disappointment to some sort of compromise that people can feel good about. So, what I love about writing on spec is that you just, like, you've done it, you send it around and people love it, they love it. And you talk to them about the movie you want to make and they go, that's the movie we want to make. And you're on the same page from day one. Obviously, you'd make little changes here and there. They may have notes and things that they want to talk about, but it's so much easier to find the person who's going to help you make the film you want to make if you write on spec, because they've already fallen in love with the version that is in the writer's head, rather than the version that's in their head already.
Yeah, that is the most perfect description of pitch to first draft that I've ever heard. That is flawless. But when jumping into your first draft, what's your process? What's the thing that you do first? Do you just sit down and write, or do you work out an outline first?
I don't work out outlines. I don't do outlines or beat sheets unless I get stuck, and then I might do it. But mostly what I do is I will just think about it for a long time and just sort of think it through and maybe sort of like make notes. And then I get to a certain point where the film, I feel like I know more than the first act. Because I think a lot of times when I go to actually type the script, to write the script, you kind of know where you're going for the first like 25 pages. And you kind of feel like once I get past that kind of big end of act one thing, it'll all just sort of take over and like the snowball will be rolling down the hill and it'll be fine. And often what happens is all you've imagined is to like page 25. And after that, you're like, oh, what now? And you can't think of anything to do with it,
Right.
And so I've got dozens of scripts that are like 25 pages long and then didn't come to anything over the past 20 years. But with this one, I remember sort of kicking the idea around, and I often tend to have two projects going at the same time. So when I was doing this one, I was actually trying to write another one. I had another idea, which I thought was probably a better idea at the time, and I was more excited about it. And I did loads of research for that one, and I was really stuck on it, and I couldn't really figure it out. And then, so this one was sort of like the side hustle that I was a bit more interested in. This is the one. This is like my cheat. The one I was cheating from the other script on.
Right.
And so I remember one time I got blocked on the other one, and I couldn't figure it out. I was really frustrated. So when I'm blocked, what I do is I just leave my office, I'll leave my house, and I'll go sit like in a cafe or in a pub, and I'll have like kind of a coffee or a pint, and I'll just sit with a notebook and I'll turn my phone off and I'll just start writing what I don't know, like ask questions. What's going to happen? What do I know? What don't I know? What are the big questions? What could happen? What shouldn't happen? And just start writing in a like longhand, sort of stream of consciousness of like the problems I'm at. And I was sort of doing that on the other one. And then the I Care a Lot film idea was sort of like, pushing its way through a little bit. So I just sort of turned the page and then I wrote basically 2 sides of a notebook. And I wrote the entire story out in 2 pages. And that's basically the entire story of the movie it is now. It just sort of came in a rush. And then I sort of sat on it for a bit because I was still writing the other one. And then the other one I sort of gave up on because it was going nowhere. So I thought, well, I'll write the guardianship idea. And so I just sat down and started writing. And the way I normally do it is I just start at the beginning and write forward. Because if I can surprise myself while I'm writing, I think I can surprise people who are watching. Do you know what I mean? Because I think if it's just like a loose outline that I've just written in 2 pages, it means that if I'm sort of thinking, well, in this situation, the bad guy's got her, she has to be begging for her life, right? And I'm like, well, why, no, that's not this character. It's like, let's do the more interesting thing. Let's do the different thing,
Yeah.
And so I think you can do that if you're writing fresh rather than you've made all the decisions, you're just sort of filling in the blanks. So, I mean, so a lot of the time it doesn't work. It feels like sort of driving without, brakes. But on this one it worked. But, even on this one, I wrote the first 50 pages and then realized I was on page 1. So I wrote 50 pages of Marla basically like becoming a guardian, realizing what the guardianship grift was, and then like got to like kind of did a time jump to her to being in this court case, and which was almost like this sort of end of Act 1 of like, oh, she's a guardian now. And it was a long Act 1, 50 pages. But I realized that's where I needed to start the movie. So I sort of just deleted, started a new document and then just wrote ahead from there. And then after that, it kind of came pretty quickly over a series of, a few weeks.
Did you know your ending before you started? Like in that 2-page sort of vomit out, overview of the story, was the ending in that, or you weren't quite sure how you were going to end it and you found that as you were writing?
I know. I think the ending was written in there. I think the sort of the last 3 twists of the ending were in there. So the sort of like the deal and then the rise and then the denouement, they were, I think, all in that sort of 2-page scribbled out in illegible handwriting, in a notebook version.
It was such a great payoff moment for me. And you had a lot of, I love setups and payoffs, and you had so many great ones in this, and it's surprising and exciting. And like you said, the more interesting versions of, I thought this was going to go this way, and this is what's happening. And, toward the end of the film, it was, there's this tease of, I'm going to leave you frustrated, and then it's wrapped up so well and so surprisingly. And one thing that I really loved is this character setup for me of early on when she has that confrontation with the son, and he gets in her face and he spits it, and you see her reaction to him trying to intimidate her. So in that moment later for me, when she's facing off against Roman and she has that reaction to what's happening right in front of her, I was almost distracted by how brilliant that early moment was, that I didn't think this is just a character moment. This is just a moment, but that moment entirely set up for me to completely, believe and be in this moment with her, when she's basically, saying, fuck you to Roman, go ahead and kill me. And it worked so beautifully. And then at the end of the film, that son showing back up to tie everything off. It was almost like this 3-act, moment of its own in like those 3 beats. And I just thought that was so brilliant. Do you find that instinctually happening, or was that like specifically, just using that one instance? There's tons of, examples to be found in this film. Are those very deliberate things, or do you find, your instinct as a storyteller, like those things just come out and find their way into those proper pockets?
I mean, I think it's both, that you have a good idea and you try it. And sometimes it works out, and sometimes you need to shift it around, or sometimes you need to make it more subtle or less subtle. I think, for example, with that one, I mean, that was sort of meant to be sort of a running thing that as a woman, she, I think, has probably kind of endured so much bullshit from men over the years,
Sure.
Especially as like an attractive woman who isn't particularly sort of meek in any way. I'm sure she's angered a lot of men just by being herself, or sort of turning them down or whatever,
Yeah.
And like, Feltram's words when he comes out of the courtroom and shouts at her were basically verbatim taken from an account of internet trolling, like things that a woman had been sent as messages over the internet after basically having a point of view. You know what I mean? Or like, Lana's just being good at her job. I mean, her job is awful, but she's just being good at her job. And he's coming out there with threats of horrible violence. And, part of that is like to establish her sort of like attitude of, she's not going to take this anymore. Basically, it's like she's sick of people talking to her like this, so she's just going to shut it down. And she just doesn't take these men seriously, because if everybody threatens to kill her and then like nobody does, it's just like, no, just leave me alone. And I kind of see this online and on Twitter, like people who put their heads above the parapet and have a point of view, especially if they're women, they get so much nonsense. And so I sort of wanted to have that as a thread through the film. And also I wanted the idea of having an ending which was sort of satisfying, like in the second that it happened, but then as it echoed out as you sort of left the theater, as I thought it was going to be, but like, struggle to watch the end credits on your streaming service. Yeah. I wanted people to sort of feel like, should I feel good about that? Because, this guy was threatening to kill her and then killed her. I mean, she did some terrible things, but she didn't kill anybody. Yeah. She didn't do anything. She actually didn't do anything illegal. She did the thing that you're meant to do in America, which is like find your niche, exploit it, and make a lot of money, and she does that. I mean, Roman, who people seem to kind of, feel sorry for when they watch the film, Peter Dinklage's character, just because he's emotional about a family member, he kills people. He like uses drug mules who die in transit. And, we see him kill people or try to kill people. And he confesses to burying somebody underneath a Jimmy John's. You know what I mean? He is the person who's breaking the law and doing the horrible things. But because he's packaged in a way that we recognize as a character, I think, that he's kind of an archetype that we see as like, oh, that's just that guy who's in the movies, right? He's the gangster who's allowed to kill people, allowed to get angry, allowed to, do all these terrible things. And we still feel for him because we've seen so many gangster stories where we feel for the gangster and need to sort of understand his like trauma and his predicament. Whereas if you show somebody like Marla and you don't give her any backstory, you just see somebody who's doing her job is awful, but it's part of like a network, a huge system in America that allows this to happen and needs this to happen to function. We think she's evil. And so she sort of should die. Whereas actually the headline would be sort of successful businesswoman killed by madman with gun in parking lot. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I thought for me, him at the beginning is the payoff at the end, and the middle bit is sort of like, it's just keeping the plate spinning, because that's, that thing at the beginning is sort of doing two things. It's sort of doing something for Marla, and then it's doing something for like the audience. Because like throughout the film, I watched a lot of films. I studied film at university. I've watched so many films and thought about films and storytelling for a long time now. And audiences are really smart and can guess where somewhere's going. And by frustrating that and changing that, or wrong-footing them, or using their own assumptions against them, you can really have a lot of power over an audience and make them feel really kind of frustrated and tense and angry, but yeah, still compelled. And, it's been interesting reading some of the film's out now. So reading some of the feedback, and some people are really angry that it didn't go the way they thought it was going to go. Whereas most of the time people are really angry when films do exactly what they think they're going to do. So it's funny what people's expectation does to them when they're watching the film. And it's funny how their own their sort of unconscious literacy in cinema makes them want to feel something, because like most people think they're quite cynical, but then they still want somebody to root for, and they get angry when there isn't somebody to root for, so all that was all sort of in the intention. But when you're writing, you sort of just need to internalize that and just try and get to the next bit, try and make people care what happens next, and get to the next bit and make them care what happens after that.
Yeah. And that was something I was struck by with the film as well, is like all these characters, it's very complicated. There's not this one clear hero to get behind and root for, but it clearly, at least to me, it didn't seem to be that you were writing it with a judgmental pen either. It didn't seem to be pointing at, hey, look, bad guy. And that was really fascinating. And then it was very fascinating that Roman is this monster, like you said. She has those pictures on the wall, and he flips through those pictures as well. But what he's doing is far more horrifying, and there's no one really truly to sink in and root for. But it all works so well, and it's so compelling. Was that something that you were worried about, that there wasn't this traditional, typical, I like this person completely sort of thing? Was that something you had in mind, or even during production, or maybe in the edit, that you were playing a balancing act, or maybe there was pushback on?
I wasn't too worried about it. I think some other people were worried about it, but I had really good partners at Black Bear Pictures who produced the film with me. who really got what I was trying to do very early on. And, you know, there was talk of like, can we put little moments in maybe where she feels like, is this the right thing to do? And, you know, I remember like we put a couple of those in, and I remember Rosamund looking at them and thinking, you know, I don't think she would do this because she's committed to this course, you know, of trying to make money. And it's almost like if you try and make the audience kind of empathize with her or try and make her feel like she thinks what she's doing is bad, it actually makes what she's doing worse, because it's almost like she understands how bad it is, but is doing it anyway, you know?
Right.
So, you know, it was important to me to make her feel like a human being, right? So she isn't a monster. She is a human being. And Roman's a human being. We all have emotions. Even the worst of us have emotions and have family and care about our family and care about, you know, we have even people who are despicable, do despicable things around the world. They have people who are in their inner circle they do care about. And so it's important to sort of show that, I think. And for me, I was never trying to make her feel likable. And I think, well, when we first started talking about casting it, there was maybe a worry that people may not want to do it because they didn't want to be seen as so unlikable. Luckily, Rosamund didn't care about that at all. She liked that. So, but no, I mean, when Rosamund was cast and we started talking about it, we had a little period where we were both in London before we went to Boston to shoot. And she'd come over to my apartment and we'd watch movies that have sort of like likable, unlikable, ambitious female characters, and just sort of see where the line was, where, you know, how far we could push it to make them likable or unlikable. And not even just female characters. We watched Ace in the Hole, the Billy Wilder film, which, you know, Kirk Douglas in that is doing terrible things and is very unlikable. But it's a brilliant film, you know. But in that one especially, you know, he sort of seems to know that this is a really horrible, terrible thing he's doing. Whereas I think Marla just feels like this is part of the system. I think she's gone through a process before this of like, if you can't beat them, join them. You know, I think she says at the beginning, you know, I've been poor and playing fair as a joke. Because I think she used to play fair and she tried the American dream. And then, you know, she just figured out that it was a fixed game. You know, it's not going to work unless you cheat, because everybody else is cheating. If you play fair, then you're a sucker. You know, that's where she kind of got herself to. So her reaction to that is to be the best at doing it their way, you know, being the best shark, being the best lioness, you know. So, you know, once we sort of made that decision, sort of riding the line of likability, because you can push people to become caricatures and become too monstrous. And she enjoys her job and she's got a glee to her ruthlessness, but she's not a monster. She's a human being, you know. And I wanted to keep everybody to be human beings, from like Fran to Roman to, you know, to Feldstrom, you know, the guy played by Macon Blair. He should feel human. He shouldn't feel like a good guy or a bad guy. And even Diane's character, you know, the only reason we hate Marla more than Roma is we see her victim. So if we spend 25 minutes with one of like Roma's drug mules, with somebody dying in the hold of a ship somewhere, we probably think that he was the monster, but we're not seeing that. We're just humanizing her victim, which makes it more complicated for a viewer, because we're showing something that in real life is hidden away, but happens all the time, probably more often than the gangster version does. The legal version happens all the time, all around us, of people being exploited legally, but we don't look at it because it's uncomfortable. And so I think people still feel uncomfortable when they say it in the movie. But I think sacrificing likability for that, I think is worth it. And I like films where everybody's despicable. I like it when your allegiance shifts during the film. And I think that's true of Alice Creed as well, that you're not quite sure who to root for in Alice Creed, even though she's a kidnap victim. You know, it sort of like shifts and sort of like, you know, turns and makes you feel a bit uncomfortable with your allegiance as the power shifts in the story. And I think the same is of this. And I like that. I like things that are about power and how people get power and want to keep power and how they use it, you know. And so I think that's a theme that runs through both of them.
Yeah. And I really relate to that and gravitate towards that as well. Just that idea of, you know, no one's really good and no one's really bad. It's like a little bit of everything. And that's just life in general. So I really love that. And I love the way that you found, you know, your ways in to humanize them. Like, in the end, you don't let the audience just have that as a victory lap. When, you know, she gets killed, that moment between her and Fran is still heartbreaking. And, you know, you humanize the moment and you don't judge her. That's why I love that. Like I said, you know, you didn't write this with a judgmental pen, in my view anyway. And that made it far more compelling for me. But Marla, overall is such an interesting, strong, well-drawn character. When you're writing a character like that, or all of the characters really in here are so well drawn, are you ever basing them off someone you know, or something specific to kind of ground that, or do you just shape them in your own way? Do you come up with a backstory that never meets the page? Like how do you make them so solid?
Well, I don't know, really. They mostly come out of my head. I mean, Marla's not based on anybody specifically. Like I said, on this one, I'd written like 50 pages of how she got to page one. And I think that did inform it for me, that I'd sort of seen her sort of in my mind, how she got here, and that made me sort of not judge her and sort of kind of like her a little bit, because she'd shown, sort of resilience, and she'd been hardened by something. She's sort of been hardened by the truth of the American dream, because I think it's something that she really did believe in, and then was become very disillusioned. I think if you're a believer that becomes disillusioned, you become much more cynical than somebody who never believed in the first place, and much more sort of willing to go against the things that you once held dear. And I think, that for me, she kind of came from that backstory that I'd already written. But she's not really based on anybody. She's just based on the idea of what I see around me. There's a lot happening in the world that we are in a stage of, people who seem to be much more interested about themselves and their own groups and their own kind of smaller and smaller circle around them. And the idea of like having empathy for other people who aren't like you seems to be foolish in some way to like a lot of people. And it seems to be a sucker if you want to help people out and you don't want to just kind of help your own, if you want to, and there's a lot of us and them and all of that sort of that situation, I wrote this in when sort of 2017 into 2018. So there was a lot of changes going on because of like Brexit and Trump becoming president, and sort of the feeling in the media and the feeling of sort of like not caring about the future that much, but just caring about yourself a bit more, which I recognize from sort of the 1980s when I was a kid, sort of Reagan and Thatcher. And so all of that stuff kind of just felt like, it's exactly not what I think or engage with, so it kind of horrified me and scared me. So to have Marla in some way represent that, but without making her sort of the monstrous cliche of that, but instead making her sort of the more disturbing version of that, which is somebody who's kind of like socially liberal and more, and like would be, if you met them at a party, you would think were great, you know what I mean? Because they're very well put together and attractive and have a great relationship and seem like, they work with caring for the elderly and they're successful. And you think, wow, this is a great person, And so the idea of that, making her someone who would be in your own life, who's not over there being somebody else, but somebody you could share space with. And all the characters be somebody that you might know, you might actually know this kind of person who does this kind of thing in real life, because they're very presentable and they're very personable, and they don't present as monsters. They just present as people who could be your friends. So when they turn out to be monsters, hopefully it's a little sort of, not so much a warning, but like, a way to make people think about the complexity of humans, because the humans who seem good may not be. We're constantly finding that out of people that you respect and admire and have sort of been kind of key public figures turn out to be doing awful things all the time. And the same is true of your, not particularly your friends, but one's friends. You like them because you've known them a long time. It doesn't mean you know everything about them and know really how they operate. And the world has got to a place right now where there's a lot of people who are, looking at the crisis we're in right now with the pandemic. There's a lot of people who are using this to make a lot of money, and to make other people poor. But they probably, there might be some people doing that, might be people but you're not, horrified by them because they just work in a job, and they're just sort of like, oh, I'm doing quite well, thank you. We're fine. How are you? When you're talking to them on Zoom. So for me, things are complicated. People are complicated. Everybody's capable of doing good things and doing bad things. And history has shown time and time again that good people do bad things all the time, And so, that sort of stuff that really, really interests me, because it's scary, with the feeling that, I could do terribly bad things. I think right now I couldn't, but I could, but so my answer to that is empathy. I think you should try and be empathetic and see it from the other person's point of view all the time. And, that's what cinema does. For me, cinema is like such a machine for empathy. I mean, I grew up watching all this world cinema and just loving it, escaping my own life into these other people's lives and experiencing it, what they're feeling. I mean, that's what I love about cinema. So sort of almost doing that, but with despicable people, I think is interesting. But it's not that I'm condoning them or wanting you to root for them. It's just sort of saying, look around and these people are in your world and this is the system that is your world.
Yeah.
And this is what we're dealing with. So, don't get angry at me. Get angry at the system.
Yeah, it's really great and compelling, and it's just that idea of, which is within the film for me, that the difficulty in processing those two things. Here's a son who truly loves his mother and is trying to rescue her, but he's also all of this, and then like you said, all those things about Marla, those two things juggling together, their beautiful relationship, what she's doing to other people with the her personal lack of empathy, just processing those two things together, that good and the bad, that relatable and the horrifying, made it really rise above for me. But I would love to shift to directing now and how you prep. Is there a point that you take your writer's hat on and put your director's hat on, or are you both the entire way through?
No, I definitely sort of put the director's hat on once we're in prep, because at that point you've got just problems to solve, because when you're a writer, you can imagine anything. You can imagine any budget with anybody in it, with as many locations as you want. But then when you're making it, you're just, you have all these problems that need solutions. And so you want to sort of be true to the script, because it's part of the same job really, as you're still telling the story, but you can't be precious, And I find that when I've directed other people's writing, I'm much more precious about their writing, because I don't know where the decision-making process came from for them. So I have to sort of just honor what's on the page, because it's there for a reason. If I mess with it too much, I might be breaking the reason it's there, because they know better than me. And it might be an instinctive thing they can't explain to me, but if I might just break it in a way that was against their intention. So I try to honor other people's writing. With mine, I'm sort of quite loosey-goosey with it. I mean, with the rhythm of dialogue, I can be pretty strict. I like, because I write very much in a sort of a rhythm. So I don't really like people going completely sort of off book and improvising. But if there's stuff that they think, we read it through, and if they say, well, this doesn't feel quite right, this is hard to say, I wouldn't say it like this, how about this? And then often I'll, change it on the spot, because it's the way you want it to be the best it can be. And being defensive isn't sort of helpful, really. So you need to kind of have an open and collaborative process when you get into the directing. And then you hire a bunch of people who are really good at what they do. So, if I'd written her office, and I think it wasn't the pages written as sort of all dark wood and quite a masculine office. And then the production designer kind of said, no, we found this location which was all glass. And I thought that was even better, because I was thinking of it very much in sort of more noirish terms for her office for the meeting with the lawyer. But, what was even better was the idea that it's all open and airy, and she's doing this in plain sight. She's not hidden away. It's not dark corners. It's not kind of smoky rooms. It's sort of bright and it's cheerful and it's colorful. I always wanted the color, but to open up all those windows, and then that became a theme, all this glass of people being sort of kept in boxes. So in the care facility, there's glass anywhere. She's behind those glass doors. And in the courtyards, they're all, she's outside, but she's surrounded by glass that cages her in. And it became a running theme that went through the prep. Because you find things when you're scouting and when you cast people, that the film does change, it evolves from the thing that's on the page that you imagined. But, all the same instincts go into being a director, because it comes from the same place, or the decision-making comes from the same place when you're directing. But it's like an evolution, rather than sort of one stops and then another one begins. And I feel all the way through to the end of the edit, or to the end of, post-production, the end of the music, end of the sound mix, you're constantly sort of evolving the thing that you're doing. It's all the same storyteller kind of protecting the sort of the tone and the version of the film that you want it to be. But I think you can't be precious about the writing, particularly when you get into the directing process, because the world will just throw things at you that you can't, defend yourself against. You'll lose location suddenly, and then you have to, cut the scene down from 5 pages to 3 pages, instantly, and things like that you have to do on the fly. So, your problem-solving writer, sort of on the set writer version of yourself kicks in, but that version of the writer is mostly servicing the production and servicing the director.
Right. Yeah. And do you storyboard or shot list before the shoot?
Well, I storyboard anything that I know there's going to be complicated. So on Alice Creed, we storyboarded the whole first section, the whole montage section, because we're going to shoot it way out of order, picking up shots here and there as we went along. So it was just really good to kind of, just for people to look at, to see what we were trying to do. So when we were kind of running off and grabbing a thing here and then with a splinter crew, or running off here between takes to get an insert shot for it, you really had a sense of what the whole sequence was. And we did the same thing on Alice Creed, where there's a moment where she's eating soup and there's a bullet on the floor and he's trying to get a bullet. And there's lots and lots of setups in that for a low budget film, lots of close-ups that, people didn't really understand what each of these close-ups meant when we were shooting them, because we were doing them so sort of out of order and sort of bouncing around, that having the storyboards really helped just to cross them off out there. But on this one, we didn't storyboard much, actually. We storyboarded just the sequence in the car where she goes, she is put in the car and then sent off the cliff and into the water, because we knew we would be shooting that in like 5 different locations. And then when we did the tank work, we wanted to be able to sort of know exactly which shots we wanted to get, so we can maximize our time in the tank and get the most cinematic version possible. And also just to show, the stunt crew and to Rosamund and the dive crew exactly what we wanted to do, so we could be totally prepared. So it's nothing better than when you're having like 50,000 different meetings about one sequence, to have the storyboards in that sequence, so individually you can talk about each storyboard and what it means,
Yeah.
But no, I mean, I like storyboarding, but most of the time, especially like on this film, we were shooting all on location. If you're shooting all on location, it's quite hard to storyboard ahead of the time, because when you get there, it looks totally different than how you imagine it. I mean, if you look at like the Parasite storyboards, Boon Chong-ho's storyboards for Parasite, because they built that set. I mean, the storyboards look exactly like the film, and Coen Brothers often storyboard everything. But for me, I quite like to find it on the day. I like to work with my cinematographer on the day and get excited about things and be a bit more instinctive rather than plan everything in advance. Though I do shot list, and I tend to shot list the night before we shoot. So I'll do some shot lists ahead of time, especially if they're for complicated sequences that require stunts or require, a lot of planning. But just on sort of like scenes in offices, conversation scenes, I will, the night before we're shooting them, I'll get home from the previous night's shoot and then I'll write the storyboards that night and then send them out to everybody. So when they turn up on set, everybody's got them and we can look at them. But, I like a lot of coverage. I'm not really a person who gets everything in one. I like to get lots of different sizes and angles and lenses to give myself as much freedom in the edits as I can have, because I'm always thinking about the edit when I shoot. And so, the idea of doing something where your only option is the pacing of one dolly shot through the whole scene, I find is like limiting rather than sort of authentic. See what I mean?
Yeah. And you brought up lenses. Speaking of lenses, when do you start thinking about that? Are you thinking about your lens choice in pre-production, or is that really when you step on set on the day is when you really start thinking about the lensing?
Well, you select the lenses you're going to use, because on a film like this, we didn't have a huge budget, so we couldn't carry thousands of lenses. And we were shooting this one, and we shot this on the Sony Venice at 6K. So it was sort of those big medium format lenses. And it was in discussion with the director of photography, and we had these brand new lenses that had just been developed that he was really excited about, and we tested them, and they looked great. They did these crazy flares, and they really work well with our LUT, which is like a lookup table, which is sort of the color that we put on the sort of our base color range that we want to use. And for this, our LUT was very colorful. And so these lenses really interacted with that really well. So we, most of the time, knew we were going to stick to those lenses. And they were sort of around, I think they were like 37, 77, and 97. Those 3 lenses we used quite a lot. But because we're at 6K and we're delivering in 4K, it means that you have the ability to push in on a lens. So you could hang a bit looser. So what normally would happen is we knew we were going to use those lenses mostly. And I know the kind of the feeling, I sort of know myself now of what I like, and I really like close-ups and I really like profile shots. And so they're always sort of built into what we're going to do. And I like, playing with the depth of field a bit. So we would just, I'd run the scene with the actors, and then we'd go in there with Artemis, if you know what that is, which is a lens finder app that you have on your iPhone. And you put in the information of your camera and all of your lenses in there. And then you can flip through the lenses and just look on your screen of your phone and then take photos of still photos. And so the director of photography and I will do that as throughout the scene being played in rehearsal. And then we'll just compare the stuff that we get excited about that feels like the movie we're making, and then we'll select the ones we like. And then that'll basically become the plan, So it's quite improvisational. It's not really set in stone, because I like films that feel purposeful. I mean, I'm not like a handheld. I mean, there is handheld in this, but that's a lot of that is because we had so little time, and in those scenes we had to get a lot of footage very quickly. But it was baked into the schedule to do handhelds on those days, so we could get through the day quickly to allow us to have time to do the more purposeful stuff towards the beginning of the movie and at the end of the movie, where we want it to feel like Marla's very much in control. So the sort of the shooting style overall of like the arc of the film is decided in prep with the DP, and that obviously helps us plan which equipment we want to hire, because again, we can't carry all the equipment all the time because we didn't have enough money. But then when we get there on the day, we're always open to sort of like, getting excited. And there's nothing better than sort of turning up and getting more and more excited as you're seeing the scene unfold. Because sometimes if you plan too much, you box your actors in and the actor's saying, well, what if I do this? And it's like, well, I didn't plan for that. It's not in the storyboards. They feel hemmed in, and you want your actors to feel free and to own their characters. And for example, in that scene with Rosamund and Chris Messina, you want them to own that scene because it's such a long scene. It was like 10-page scene, and 12-minute takes every time you do a setup. That you want them to kind of like get the energy and get the feeling that they're in charge of the scene, rather than having to sort of stop and start because you've got like a weird sort of like dolly zoom you want to do on something, So no, you just want. For me, I love shooting and I love working with actors, and so like that just becomes the thing. It's like, what is the performance? What is the moment? What's the emotion? And what's the best way of conveying that? And you can make a plan for that, but on the day, for me, you sort of want to be able to sort of duck and parry to get the best version you can.
Yeah, and speaking of the actors, what's your process there? Do you do table reads? Do you do rehearsals, or do you really wait for the day and block it then?
I would love to do rehearsals. We didn't get much chance. These days you don't get much chance because everybody's so busy that you just get people flying in, especially if you got an actor like Peter. Chris Messina just showed up on that day for the big long scene. I think I'd met him on Skype, and then he just arrived that day, like word perfect and ready to go. And we just rehearsed it that morning as I watched them and as the cinematographer watched them. But, and we got maybe 2 hours with Peter and Rosamund together. And then we got maybe a day with Rosamund and Asa together. And that was mostly just reading their lines out and just pushing and pulling on the lines to make sure they felt right and the rhythm of the scene felt right. Because obviously I read my own stuff out aloud when I'm reading back a script sometimes. But having two actors and their instincts and what they've thought about the characters come in immediately sort of different, and some things there might be some edges that feel a bit jagged, and so you want to just work them out. But I'd love to have more rehearsal. On Alice Creed we got a bit more rehearsal, but we didn't on this. But we didn't. No, I didn't do a table read on this. I don't like table reads because they're a bit like first drafts. It's like they can only be disappointing.
Yeah.
Because if people love the script and are excited about it, and you sit down, especially if you can't get all your sort of all your actors in. What happens if you can't get your somebody from your lead cast in? You hire a local actor to play that role, and a local actor is never going to be as good as they may be good, but they're not going to do the same thing as for example, Peter Dinklage coming in. There's a reason Peter's Peter and he's so successful because he's an amazing actor, and you can't expect somebody local who's working for a day's pay just to bring it. So I think people get sort of scared and nervous after table reads. And I don't find them useful. I think maybe people in production find them useful, but I think a production meeting is just as useful, where I can just talk through everything that they need to know or any questions they've got. And in a way, people then are more excited about seeing the dailies because that's when they can see it come alive. Whereas if they've seen it at the table read, as I say, this for me, if the table read is brilliant, you then are under pressure to do it like that because everybody liked it like that. And it's like, well, that's not how I envisaged it.
Right.
I didn't direct anybody at the table read. They're just saying it out loud. And, I've done good table reads and terrible table reads, and I don't find them very useful. I'd rather, if I'm going to get all the cast in one room for a day, I'd rather rehearse with them. But mostly, my process is just to make just to work out what the actor's process is. All actors are different. They all work differently, all need different things. And so it's trying very quickly to watch how they work and be as supportive and collaborative as possible with them. And just ask them and treat them I treat everybody very much like grown-ups and say, what did you think of that? And ask them questions of well, what you seem struggling on this bit, what's the problem? You know what I mean? Can we fix it? And just be very sort of matter of fact and supportive for the actors so they feel comfortable and feel like they can own the material. Because I think if an actor doesn't believe what they're saying, it's very hard for them to make you believe what they're saying. So
yeah.
They're almost like they have to believe the magic trick to sell the magic trick. And sometimes it's trying to find a way to talk about the script with an actor that they know the intention and know the way in. And sometimes they think, I thought it was going to be like this. And it's like, no, it's not like that. And they go, oh, it makes sense now. And, or it still doesn't make sense. And I said, but try it that way. And they try it that way. And they're like, oh, I think I know what you're going for. And then you find it. And when you find it, everybody looks at each other as like, that was it. That felt good. And you can just tell it just feels good when it works.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you step on set with the actors, are you blocking the scene? Are you walking the whole thing? Are you getting a rehearsal in before you roll cameras? And if so, do you find yourself switching up your plan, your shot list while looking at how your actors are inhabiting that, scene? Do you find you and your DP switching, let's do this instead? How often do you find that sort of thing?
Oh, that happens every day. So I mean, the shot list is just sort of like, for me, it's just a process of me having to think about breaking down the scenes in my head before I get to stack. And like the moments that were important to me, plus kind of ideas of what I think might work. And then you get there and you try the thing that might work. And often it doesn't. It's like, well, that's a waste of time because we've already got that moment that was great on the close-up of Rosamund, for example. She did that great, so I don't need to do this I don't need to spend like a whole other take doing a different version of it because that's the one we're definitely going to use. So, things always pivot and change because you haven't got enough time. I mean, things always go slow in the morning and then you're always running around like a madman in the afternoon just trying to make your day. And so you're always adapting. And, you get the energy that, you're on set and you just can feel when something is going to be better doing it a different way. So the shot list then sometimes almost becomes like a bingo card of like you're crossing things off and thinking, oh, we've already got that. But it's a really good sort of like fail safe to make sure that you've got the scene. If you're not doing storyboards that you can cross off, you've had the shot list of like, did we do this? Did we cover? Do we get that movement, that insert shot of the hand picking up the gun? It's like, no, we didn't. We need to get it. So if we don't get it that day, we have to carry it for another day, And so I wish I had enough time to sort of get all of my shot list and then kind of mess around afterwards and get other stuff.
Yeah.
But I've never had that luxury. I mean, I've always been like totally under the gun with not enough time on everything I've ever made. So you just learn to trust your instincts and then get, when something feels good, you go with a good thing rather than the thing that you thought might be good,
Yeah, absolutely. And here's a very specific question, but I find in directing it, there's always like little things that are shocking to me as far as like how much time and attention I put on a singular choice, which, within the film, it's like that thing just happened and that's that. Mm. But one thing that kind of stuck with me was, the end moment when Felsom shoots Marla, one shot to the chest around the heart area, and that kind of stuck with me as I couldn't help but wonder, like, was that in the script? Why just one shot? Why, you know what I mean? Because I found so many moments where it's like as simple as these earrings are these earrings. And it ends up being this big choice. And this is like a large moment. So was that like a thought process for you? Was that just an instinctual thing that was just this? Was there a reasoning behind? Maybe there wasn't a reasoning behind it, but it was just one of those moments that stuck out to me that was a choice that you had to make, and it was very specific and a pivotal moment of the film that it was one shot and where that shot landed.
So there's various decisions that get you there. I mean, there's the sort of the script decision is that I wanted him to sort of be able to kill her easily. You know what I mean? Because you've had this whole movie where two people are fighting each other and one's a mob boss and like she's sort of indefatigable and sort of extremely impressive and like a predator, and they're sort of going head to head, and it's like who's going to win, and then this sort of insignificant guy can just walk up and shoot in a way that undermines kind of everything, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I kind of wanted him to be able to do it easily, even though he's sort of like shaking with the gun and it's like his mother's gun or something. You can sort of, that was sort of the story we're telling, like he's got like this small gun he's using and he's almost surprised that he did it and almost surprised that he did it so well. Then the positioning of where it hits her, and it's like, well, if he's going to kill her, I don't want to do it as a headshot because then you can't have the end scene. But you also don't want to, you don't want her to sort of bleed out from the stomach because like then you might leave it open-ended. And I kind of wanted people to feel like she probably does die rather than is just kind of very badly wounded. So there was that. So like, getting shot near the heart feels like that's, going to kill her in, enough time that we can sort of show it happening. But then there's also like the practical things. It's like she's wearing this suit, which we chose a white suit for thematic reasons, which is that she's very colorful all the way through. And then she becomes kind of the pure essence of sort of capitalism at the end. So everything becomes much more white and steely and gray as we go further forward. And also white shows up blood really well, So if she was wearing a black suit, you wouldn't see the blood as well. So we have the white suit. And the white suit has a lapel. And because we got a practical blood rig, running up in a tube on the actress, on Rosamund, that you want to be able to hide that somewhere that doesn't look really obvious. And so you hide it sort of slightly in the lapel. So that means you have to have it in that area. You know what I mean?
Right.
And then you work backwards from there. So you have that blood coming out practically. And then when we actually put the shot on, because it's not a squib, it's a visual effect, the shot you sort of position close to where that squib was. So it's sort of this mixture of practical and sort of intention that, you sort of end up getting what you get, but it all felt right. Every decision is like, if we moved it around and made the shot bigger, smaller, left, right, or we could have had to make two shots. We had different takes of him shooting, but it just felt right for one shot and then he gets taken down. But he's almost like as soon as he's pulled the trigger, he's like regretted it almost, you know?
Yeah.
That felt kind of right for his character.
Yeah, that's great, man. I love that mixture of the thematic, the story, the practical, all combining to this, because that kind of feels like every decision, right? Like throughout any project. So that's just such a great breakdown of, you know, the directors making a choice. What do you have next after that? I mean, I love all of your work, so I'm excited to see what you do next. Is there something next on the books that you have coming up?
I got a couple of things I'm working on, neither of which I can actually tell you much about, but I can sort of tease you. I've got, and I don't know, you know, you're always hopeful that things will happen and turn out for the best and you actually make them, but you don't know, right? So
yeah,
these are things that I'm working on that I hope get made. During lockdown, I wrote a feature script, which is very different from this, which I can't say really anything about, but it's a different feel, but it's very much of my kind of world. It's probably a step closer to sort of Alice Creed sort of feel than this one.
Oh, nice.
And then I've got like a TV show that I'm hoping will get made in the near future that I've created and I'm writing.
Awesome, man. Well, congrats on an absolutely wonderful film. I've heard nothing but great things about it. So congrats on what seems to be great success around this film as well. And I really can't wait to see what you do next. And thank you very much for taking the time to chat with us today.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. It's a pleasure.
So that's it for today. A huge thank you to Jay for taking the time to talk with us today. Of course, go to filmriot.com/podcast, find the episode page for this episode, and you'll get a lot more info on Jay, including where you can find him online. Of course, you can find me online at twitter.com/Ryan_Connolly. And until next time, don't forget to write, shoot, edit, repeat.